I hope you all had an enjoyable weekend. And again, want to give some thanks for all the work that you put in the last couple of weeks at this very, very fast-paced process. In the end, as you know, we hope to be able to produce a list of bills that could be submitted to the legislature that we believe would have an immediate impact on limiting racial disparities in our state. That is our goal for this process. Want to just remind you that we are being recorded and streamed live, as all our meetings are public and they are open. We have today from 11:30 to 1 to get through 4 subcommittee reports. We will hear from subcommittees 4, 5, 6, and 7, which is the totality of our subcommittee work. And we won't waste any time in doing so. We are in the 3rd phase of this process, the priority setting phase. And in the interest of time, I'm just going to ask if the staff could introduce themselves, and then I'm going to ask all of our committee members to reserve time for their committee report to introduce themselves, and we'll go from there. We've got a lot to get done, so I'd like for staff to introduce themselves right now, if they could.
Hi everyone, I'm Megan Rochello, the Chief of Staff in the House Majority Office.
And I'm Katie Walsh. I'm the Communications Director in the House Majority Office.
I'm Reggie Parson. I'm from the Speaker's Office.
So thank you, staff. And as I said, as we go through the meeting, we'll make sure that everyone has had an opportunity to introduce themselves, including the members of the Permanent Commission. Right now, I'm going to quickly turn it over to Megan, and she's going to just bring us into the priority setting tool, and then we'll turn it over to the subcommittee chairs for subcommittee 4. Thank you. Megan?
Megan, you're on mute.
I did. So for those of you who were with us last week on Wednesday, this will be a bit of a review, but there are a number of people joining us today and using this tool for the first time. So just wanted to take a couple minutes to go through it. What we suggest you do is try and use this tool as the groups are going through their review of the bills. We know it does go pretty quickly, so if it doesn't work for you to input your information exactly as they go along, maybe use it to take notes or to be able to come back to and refer to. So the whole purpose of this sheet is to help give the Permanent Commission more of a score to work with as they continue their work after today on priority setting for the groups of bills in front of us. And you'll see on the document there are instructions. Basically what we need you to do is to score each bill, both the ease and impact, on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the easiest and most impactful and 1 being the hardest and least impactful. The worksheet does self-populate the totals in the ease and impact score category. And just a little bit about those categories. So when you're thinking about the ease of a bill, you're thinking about if we were to get this done, do we have the human resources we would need, the financial resources we would need, the favorable systems and structures in place that will be required, and a favorable external environment, including social, cultural, political environments. Looking at that very first bill, I would say, you know, okay, do we have the ability to enforce the Maine Human Rights Act? I would say we may have some good human resources required there, so I would put a 4 in that category. I may say we don't have a whole lot of financial resources required, so put a 2 there. Maybe give it a 3 for systems and a 4 for a favorable external environment, and then it would calculate an ease score for me in that gray category. Then you'd move over to the impact columns, and the impact is thinking about, for the impacted communities, will we improve health, hope, empowerment, and determination? Will we improve financial opportunities? Will we improve the systems and structures that impact these communities? And will we improve the environment that these communities operate in? And you would then go across and do the same thing with the score, and it will total everything up for you. You'll notice along the bottom of the document, there is a tab for each group. So today we'll be starting with group number 4. You should be able to pull that right up. And I think that's it. Once we are completed with today, you do have, I believe, until Tuesday evening to return these sheets. And to return them, I just ask that you send them in an email directly to me.
Megan, Representative Talbot Ross, may I ask Megan a clarifying question?
Yes, please, go ahead, Senator.
Okay, Megan, just to make sure I understand, it says on the spreadsheet that 5 is easiest when looking at the ease scores. So for example, if it's a high ease score, the high impact score is very intuitive. But if it's a high score, it means it doesn't require a lot of resources or that it could be implemented. So like if it costs no money, then it might get a 5. But if it costs hundreds of millions of dollars, then it might get a 1. Is that the way we should be thinking about it?
Yeah, that is exactly correct. So the impact does make a lot of sense. A big 5 for lots of impact. On the ease side of things, you're thinking the easier it is, the higher the score is. So the less money it costs, the less resources it would require, the easier or the higher the score would be.
Anything else? Great. So subcommittee 4, if you'd like to introduce your members and take it away, is James on the line, subcommittee 4?
Yep, I'm here, Rachel. So I'm going to do the I'm going to give the summary on behalf of the committee. I know of my fellow committee members who are on there. Vice Chief Sillaboy is co-chairing with me. Senator Shannette is also on the line. Representative Brennan. I think those are the folks who are around right now. And
I'm also here, James.
Oh, great.
I'm here too.
Oh, great. So I think that's Representatives Matlack and Roberts. Is that right?
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Thank you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through, there were a handful of bills that we identified as being our higher priority bills that we wanted to spend a little more time talking about. And then the rest of the bills we're also recommending, we'll have a much shorter summary to give on those. So the first one I wanted to talk about was LD 2056. This is a bill that would develop a plan to provide for the most frequent users of housing services or public health services, such as psychiatric hospitals or emergency rooms. It's estimated there are maybe approximately 200 individuals that fit into this category. This is one that would directly address the largest disparities in public health and housing, and we should reduce the community's interactions with law enforcement and improve overall social determinants of health. On the data side, according to the point in time count, 1 in 3 of Maine's homeless population in general are people of color, and that's not including the Latinx community as people of color in this case. One recommendation we might have for this would be to explicitly include a member of the task force who represented the interests of people of color. That's not currently set up. There's no current fiscal note for that, but there will likely be a small cost for the administrative side of things. The next bill I wanted to look at was LD 920. This bill would provide financial support to individuals and organizations to help SNAP participants, food stamp folks, afford locally grown fruits and vegetables. We know that access to fresh produce is particularly difficult for people of color nationally, who are more likely to live in food deserts and not have access to large grocery stores and more reliant on things like dollar stores. Access to these kinds of foods has a variety of long-term positive effects on health, and especially for children. On the data side, we know that about 9% of Maine's food stamp households are headed by Black, Indigenous, and people of color, compared to 5% of households overall. So they're certainly represented more in that SNAP population. The projected cost for that is $500,000 over the biennium. The next bill I wanted to talk about was LD 1403. This is a bill that would restore general assistance reimbursement for towns to prior levels. It would give additional state reimbursement to communities whose GA expenses are particularly high. This is particularly important for large service center communities such as Portland. And we know that a very large number of GA recipients in these communities are Black, Indigenous, and people of color. The bill would also effectively allow the tribes to be reimbursed for GA expenses. Currently, the way the program is structured, they're effectively not able to use the program or get reimbursed by the state because it's based on property tax valuations. So this would open the program up to tribes and tribal members for the first time. We don't have a racial breakdown of GA recipients in general easily available, but we know in 2016, the city of Portland reported that 53% of their GA recipients were either refugees, asylum seekers, or visa holders. They didn't give a racial breakdown there, but we assume that most of those are people of color of some kind. There's no estimate for the potential number of tribal beneficiaries as well. The projected cost for that is $2.4 million over the biennium. The next bill I wanted to highlight was LD 2141. This is a bill that would prevent an imminent, potentially harmful change to main care services to children with disabilities and would allow for legislative input over that change. The assumption is that Black, Indigenous, and people of color are overrepresented within that affected population. There's no fiscal note on that bill, but there's likely to be a small cost to conduct the study. Next, I wanted to talk about LD 1158. This is an act to provide property tax relief. This bill would amend the property tax fairness credit to restore some of the protections in the previous circuit breaker program for Mainers whose rent and property tax costs consume a large proportion of their household income. There is some evidence to suggest that these housing costs are especially high for Black, Indigenous, and people of color in Maine. We wanted to note that the bill is not necessarily targeted and it will affect a large number of people. It's also a little unclear how the bill would interact with sort of some changes that were recently made to the property tax fairness program. And so we were advising that the commission sort of weighs up the cost of whether such a large scale bill is appropriate and how much impact it would have on people of color more specifically. LD 1422, an act regarding conditions in correctional facilities for female prisoners. This would create new standards and reporting requirements for incarcerated women in Maine. We know that women, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, just like their male counterparts, are overrepresented in Maine's correctional facilities, and that women of color face particular challenges that need to be addressed within that setting. Which is why we're recommending this bill. It does not have a fiscal note, but it's likely to include some administrative costs. LD 803, this is an act to create 4 regional mental health receiving centers. This bill has actually been amended from its original version. It would provide $4.4 million annually to support existing rapid response programs for people experiencing mental health crises. The original bill as written was going to establish new brick and mortar centers, but it's moved to moving that money into existing services, which are effective but underfunded. And these are the kind of services that are critical to reducing our reliance on law enforcement to deal with mental health emergencies, which currently leads to a lot of the ill treatment of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. The fiscal cost is $4.4 million annually. There was a question in the comments about whether the order I was using was reflective of our priorities. It's actually not particularly, just in that these first bills that I've highlighted were in general our higher priority bills, but within that there wasn't a particular order of how valuable we thought they were. Those are the bills that we had highlighted as being sort of particular importance. And I wanted to run through the remaining bills and just give a brief overview of each of those. And again, these are in no particular order. LD 44 has a few different provisions in it. It creates a new Class C crime for reckless endangerment of a child, and there's potential concerns about creating a new classification of crime if it's going to lead to more incarceration. It does clarify age limits for sexual assault of a minor to prevent more arrest and detention of juveniles for that crime. But probably most importantly for our purposes, it affirms the sovereignty of tribal courts around with the the conditions around convicted felons owning firearms in Maine, and includes tribal convictions under that. LD 2000 is another criminal justice bill. This one would make some relatively small technical changes, but they would include improvements to conditions for incarcerated women. But we noted that it wouldn't do anything to reduce incarceration rates in general. We had two bills that were dealing with student debt. LD 73 would provide an income tax deduction for certain student loan payments. LD 394 would authorize a general fund bond for student loan debt relief. Both of those we highlighted because we know that due to intergenerational wealth disparities, Black, Indigenous, and people of color are more likely to have to take out student loans in the first place and need to take out larger loans to take out degrees. A bond with forgiveness is likely to have more impact than the tax credit. There are a series of bills looking at child development. LD 115 would increase funding for home visiting program for new parents. These kind of programs can improve outcomes for children over the long term, especially low income kids, which includes a lot of Black, Indigenous, and children of color. 1584 would, I've got a bit of a weird echo going on. LD 1584 would increase the availability of childcare providers through providing extra funding for early childhood educator programs, which would indirectly lower the cost of childcare and increase the quality of childcare available. And LD 1936 would allow Maine Care to directly reimburse parents who stay home to provide in-home care for their children. There's research to show that children do better when their parents are caring for them. And it's assumed, but not necessarily certain, that Black, Indigenous, and people of color are disproportionately within this Maine Care population. There were three bills relating to public health more broadly. So LD 692 would increase reimbursement rates for licensed clinical social workers, which are a group that we assume, and that would increase the availability of those services, reduce turnover in the profession, and we assume that Black, Indigenous, and people of color are most at need for some of these services through the Maine Care program. LD 1461 would support early intervention and treatment of mental health disorders. Again, the hope is that this would reduce interactions with the criminal justice system, especially for the populations we're concerned about. LD 1919 would create a tax credit for family caregivers. The current version of this bill would create a pilot program to compensate Mainers for unpaid care work. We know that women of color are especially likely to be doing this kind of unpaid work, caring for children and adults. And the pandemic has sort of shown the increased pressure that women of color are in this current situation to drop out of the workforce to look after children and adults. And then finally, there were three more bills I wanted to look at. LD 1531 would establish the Maine Food System Investment Program. This is assumed to be a mechanism that would help to improve food security statewide, which is a problem that disproportionately impacts people of color. LD 1947 would fund improvements to career and technical education centers, which again would improve access to career and tech education and provide more work opportunities and pathways to economic security for people of color. And then LD 2021 is a broadband bond. This would provide access to high-speed internet in more parts of the state, and which we highlighted as could be potentially especially beneficial for the tribes, although it's not clear exactly where those investments would go right now. So that's my sort of breakneck pace through all the different bills that we were looking at. I think there's a few minutes left. I don't know, are we taking questions at this point, or if any of my committee members have things they want to add?
If there are no questions, could I just ask the committee to identify itself one more time? I know the co-chairs, Vice Chief Silvoy and James Mayall. Could Subcommittee 5 just quickly introduce and just say your name?
Subcommittee
Uh,
4.
Vice
Subcommittee 4, sorry about that.
Vice Chief Richard Chillabui,
Representative Tiffany Roberts,
Representative Ann Matlack,
Representative Michael Brennan,
Senator Justin Chenette.
Senator Shanna Bellows. Wait, I'm not on subcommittee 4. Sorry, Rachel.
That's okay. That's all right.
You're an honorary member, Shanna.
So any questions for Subcommittee 4? And James, you don't know what the number of bills that you're putting forth, do you? The totality?
I believe that it's about 20. I'm not sure if that's the exact number, but
Okay, thank you. Seeing no other questions, we will move on to Subcommittee 5. And I believe Subcommittee Chairs Isaiah Reed and Ken Lewis. Are you all prepared to do a report?
Yes, we are. This is Reverend Lewis. I believe that Isaiah is going to lead this process for our subcommittee. I believe he's on, and maybe the rest of our subcommittee will introduce themselves as well, Madam Chair.
That would be wonderful.
All right, can everyone hear me or is it quiet?
Little louder, Isaiah.
All right, it must
Speak
be my
up.
headphones. Hold on.
Isaiah, your bandwidth is low at what it says. You're gonna have to
Is that
speak
better?
really loud.
Oh,
I don't know if you're able to go Ethernet connection versus Wi-Fi. That might help.
Is that better? I don't know if I can hear.
Why don't we do introductions of the subcommittee, Reverend Lewis, and then we'll see if Isaiah.
Sure, those members who are subcommittee 5, if you could take them a moment to introduce yourself, that'd be helpful.
Representative Jim Handy from Lewiston.
Denise Tepler from Topsom.
Heidi Brooks from Lewiston,
Representative Craig Hickman from Winthrop,
Thank you.
Isaiah, you all set now?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
I think you're gonna have to turn it up as loud as you can because you're a little soft. Or you maybe have to talk really loud.
That might have to happen, I guess. Can everyone hear me if I talk like this?
Let's go for it.
All right. So I'm going to take a similar approach to last as far as starting with those that we decided were higher priority, I think, that we will address first. And these will be a little out of order, and then we will continue down kind of in numerical order after that. So start with LD 1134, and active set aside funds from the federal block grants for certain communities. This will require 20% of federal block grant funds be set aside for the most vulnerable communities and 10% be set aside for Indian nations, tribes and bands. This limits the amount of funding available for the purposes for which they're currently being used. So I think that this is a really good set of legislation since it directly, sorry, can everyone hear me or am I too quiet?
I can hear you.
Keep going. Keep going.
Sorry. Is a direct and significant impact, I think, in that we think this funding goes for these communities.
So Isaiah, I'll step in because you're fading out. You're
Okay.
fading out a little bit. And so if you can maybe, looks like your internet's a little slow. Let me know if you feel better. If you start talking now, maybe we can hear you.
I think it might be best if you feel comfortable taking over.
Okay.
I'm just not more.
All right, so we were talking about LD 1134, an act to set aside funds from federal block grants for certain communities. As we know, if the remaining 70% of federal block grant funds are not sufficient to accomplish the purpose of the purposes, the programs are not modified. You know, we identified that general fund appropriations may need to be used to supplement the federal resources. We felt that this particular set aside would be a benefit to communities that have traditionally not benefited from some of this set aside, some of these block grants. And so we wanted to bring that forward. Second, LD 1234, an act to expand the value of the homestead exemption to $25,000 in state reimbursement, 70% lost property tax revenue. This is a significant issue for some of our seniors and minority populations across the state. Having the exemption benefit them, as you know, in local communities and municipalities. Tax burden continues to cause some stress and strain for those particular populations. This increase, it's a $5,000 increase, will lower taxes of those low income tax brackets. Again, this is a major impact for some of our senior populations across the state who may be living only on Social Security or meager retirement income. And so we thought that that would be of some benefit. I hope everyone can hear me okay. I'm talking, but I see
Yeah.
Vice Chief Sillaboy is in the middle of the screen. So, okay, very good. And Isaiah, if you're ready, let me know. LD 1403, an act to amend the general assistance laws governing reimbursement. I think this speaks for itself. It establishes 90% reimbursement for general assistance costs in municipalities and also includes an amendment to give tribes 100% reimbursement. I think this is something that has a direct impact on populations that are adversely impacted. We had strong agreement there. LD 1756. 1756. This targets younger populations, talking about re-entry of prisoners into the community. We felt an act to improve public safety through this coordination was an important criminal justice related measure. And again, it targets a younger population who really need some wraparound related services on coordinating that reentry. We want to make sure that there's some reconciliation with community, that people have an opportunity to live and to grow and to be employed and to have the services that they need to be successful.
Can you hear me better now?
I can. You've done all the heavy lifting on this. I'd like to give way to you. We're on LD 493 now.
I feel like might be a little better speaker than I am. But on 1756, I can add extra comment as far as this bill would also include institutions like institutions such as sober houses and other what's the word I'm looking for, but systems to help with reentry as well, to address the strain on issues such as like probation and too many people being incarcerated, which, as we know, disproportionately impacts people. So move on to L493, an act to provide lung cancer counseling and screening for main care recipients. As statistics show time and time again, healthcare is an area of big disparity, And so we thought that this would help narrow this gap by including important preventive measures such as screening and also counseling to help with lung cancer in the state of Maine for Maine care recipients, which are mostly working group people, which includes disproportionately
Isaiah, your Wi-Fi is
solar and Black Indian.
Isaiah, your Wi-Fi is still coming in and out. I would ask that maybe you want to try to take your Ethernet cable and put it in the back of your laptop so that you're not using Wi-Fi, using a direct connection. So you may drop off and come back. So if you can do that, I will try to muddle through all this hard work that you did. And but if you can, if you do that, I think you'll have a strong connection if you have an Ethernet cable from your laptop directly to your modem. Okay.
Unfortunately, I don't think I have a I'm using a Chromebook, which I don't
Okay.
usually use, and it doesn't.
So I hope everyone heard the issue around Maine care and lung cancer screening and counseling. The prevalence of tobacco use amongst minority populations is high. It's disproportionate for those who are lower income. Lung cancer is has a high mortality rate. It sneaks up on you, and screening and counseling and treatment is an important aspect for narrowing the gaps in health disparities. LD 399. LD 399, an act to align wages for direct care workers for persons with intellectual disabilities or autism with the minimum wage. This is self-explanatory. We know that direct care workers are predominantly female, predominantly people of color in many parts of our state, and to align their wage at the very minimum with the minimum wage is something that is just something we should do as a state. LD 302. Isaiah, you want to give it a shot? 302.
All right. Sorry for back here. This is an act to amend the laws. Is it not coming through?
No, it's not.
Or,
So an act to amend the laws
Oh.
governing post-conviction review.
I want to quickly step in and say, Isaiah, you could also either turn off your video or call in from your phone, and I think you might have better luck.
yeah, I was supposed to try doing that. Thank you very much.
So I'm going to wait for you to turn off your video. We want to give it a shot now?
All right. Is this coming through any better? Or will I have to use?
Yes, I think that's better.
Okay, great. Yeah. So this is an act to amend the laws governing post-conviction review in order to facilitate fair hearing of all evidence in each case involving a claim of innocence. I think that this is pretty self-explanatory in that it just expands on our liberties within our justice system and only reinforces the right to a fair trial. And so therefore, through this and offering more opportunities for those who are going through the trial process to minimize false convictions, and I think just makes the system more efficient and fair. So I think that, and as we know, because people of color are incarcerated at a higher rate, that this is a important piece of legislation that we would like to put forward to help address the issues we're trying to address. LD 776, I'll just give a second so people can get there. I know it's kind of hard to scroll around. It's an act regarding post-judgment motion by a person seeking to satisfy the prerequisites for obtaining special restrictions on the dissemination and use of criminal history record information for certain criminal convictions. What this does is it expands, and I believe this is Chair Rachel Talbot Ross's led work. So if she wants to add anything to this, that'd be appreciated. but it expands from just applying to certain Class E crimes and to include some Class D crimes as well. And also it raises the age where this motion is eligible from 20 years of age to 25 years of age, which these two components together would simply make it would lower incarceration rates, and also as Class E and D crimes are less serious crimes, would lessen incarceration and convictions for those who are committing more less serious crimes that are not a real threat to the community. Is that a good summary of that, I think?
Yeah, it's perfect. Thank you.
All right. 1907 is the next one to look at. 1907 is an act to restore the Penobscot Nation and Passamaquoddy tribe the authority to exercise jurisdiction under the under the Federal Tribal Law and Order Act 2010 and Order, yeah. And so this was, I think that the title of this is pretty self-explanatory and only acts to increase the authority that our indigenous nations have over themselves, and that is something that we need to, and their representation in government, and something we need to reinforce in general.
So LD 4
board as, sorry.
Community-based organizations to participate in diversion projects for persons with substance use disorder. It's important, provide grants to municipalities. This is the Substance Use Disorder Assistance Program. This is an amendment to that program. Provides grants to municipalities, counties, and regional jails to carry out projects designed to reduce substance use related crimes and recidivism. Community-based organizations providing substance use assessment, treatment, education, or support of group services. Again, we felt that this was probably any diversionary program that keeps folks out of incarceration is something I think we ought to be very supportive of, and it has to be community focused and community led. We thought that this was a good bill that would do some strong work in that particular area. 1937. That's the act to provide timely access to behavioral health services for children and to address trauma and impacts of the opioid crisis. We know that adverse childhood experiences is a major issue as it relates to the opioid crisis, other issues that produce trauma in young people. To be able to access these services, we felt was an important measure to address. Those services should be accessible easily and early. That would benefit our children over the long term. LD 2039. That's an act to provide for judicial review in compliance with the federal legislation known as the Family First Prevention Services Act. Isaiah did a lot of work on that one in particular to identify it just makes sense. I mean, we're talking about judicial review and to be in compliance with federal legislation. I think the state ought to do that. And I think that this particular bill helps with that process. I will say that after our additional review, we kind of put resolves in a different category as resolves produce a report or a commission or a subgroup, things of that sort. And we kind of tried to focus on acts that would have action and not only produce a report. And we have some that are listed there. So if you look at our list overall, all the resolves are kind of bunched together, did not consider those necessarily a priority. as they are resolves. There were some other thoughts, but I know that we are running low on time. There were some other areas in which our committee had some significant conversation on, but they didn't necessarily rise to the higher levels or scores of what we articulated earlier, to include 2022, 21-25, 14-24, 19-47, and 21-14. I think that hits everything. If we have another commission subcommittee member with a little bit of time we might have left, I didn't know if you want to weigh in. I want to thank Isaiah for leading this charge, and we have 2 minutes left. And I think he put a note in, they were important but not as high priority from the review. So
Thanks, Isaiah, for putting that all together for all of us. I think that pretty much reflects what most of us agreed on. Thank you.
One thing I'd also mention is that in our list, you'll also see bills regarding issues concerning the environment. I'll put the numbers on there, but
I'm sorry, Isaiah, it's garbled. We really can't hear you. And if you type it in, I'll read it for you if you'd like, if you're able to do that. What you're saying is probably very important, and but we can't make out the audio.
Okay, I'll do that if you can hear that.
Reverend Lewis,
I think we've gone through our lists, and
do you know, Reverend Lewis, it's Rachel, do you have an approximate number of bills that you're putting on the list?
let me pull up the list. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We had 12 that rose to the higher level of priority. And then, of course, we had 4 resolves, and then 5 that kind of fell in the lower priority.
Great, thank you. Any questions for subcommittee 5? For any of the subcommittee members? We're going through this really quite quickly, so I know that it's hard to fill out the form. I think everyone is just cognizant of the limited amount of time that we have for all of these bills. So I thank you all for getting through this in such a rushed fashion, and hope that you'll look up these bills on your own time and fill out the forms accordingly. Want to add my thanks to Isaiah for astounding amount of work and commitment to this process. Thank you, Isaiah. Thank you, Reverend Lewis. We will turn to subcommittee 6 unless there are, again, any questions, not seeing any hands. Okay. Subcommittee 6, which the co-chairs are Ian Yaffe and Garrett Stewart. If you would allow your subcommittee members to introduce themselves, and then we'll hear your report. And thank you.
Great. Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Ian Yaffe. I'm one of the co-chairs. Garrett, if you could introduce yourself, and then any other subcommittee 6 members who are on the call, if you could introduce yourself, that would be appreciated as well. The
Morning,
plan.
Madam.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Good morning, Madam Chair. I'm Garrett Stewart. I'm from Portland.
Good morning. I'm Maggie O'Neill, and I represent part of SOCCOM.
Thank you, Garrett. Thank you, Representative O'Neill. Is anybody else on the line from Subcommittee 6?
Yes, I'm Representative David McCray up in the county in Fort Fairfield.
Good afternoon. Thank you. And I have the participant list minimized so that I can see the bills, but is there anybody else that can introduce themselves? So not hearing anything, if you do, just feel free to unmute and introduce yourself. The plan that we'll use for this afternoon, for the next 20 minutes is really just that we'll go through the bills in the numerical order. We'll share a little bit of what we found from them and our notes around the impact and ease. For any of the subcommittee members, perhaps the easiest way, if there's something that you want to add, would be for you just to add that in real time. I'm going to try and go through this with enough time so that we have some moments for questions and answers, and also for subcommittee members to share any bills that were really at the top of your priority lists. So knowing that we're short on time, without further ado, we'll start with LD 181, which is an act to provide funding for free health clinics in the state. This basically provides $100,000 a year to support health clinics that provide all of their services to the public at no cost. So we thought that had a relatively low cost and with a moderate impact. LD 519 expands adult dental health insurance coverage. This bill in particular makes dental coverage required as part of health insurance packages. I believe there's another dental bill, and so we're not really talking about that one, but we found overall that expanding access to dental care was an extremely important task that would benefit community members. It has a big lift in terms of cost, obviously, and I guess we defer. I don't have a way to compare the bill that was in subcommittee 1, but knowing that that's something to consider. And then I see Keith had a question. So what happened with the bills on our subcommittee is, if you got a spreadsheet from last week, that spreadsheet doesn't have any of our bills in it. It just repeats subcommittee 5, I believe. So there's a newer email from Reggie that would have come out today or yesterday, which has an updated spreadsheet with our bills included in it. And so I'll pause for a minute if there's any other clarification needed.
I'll add that Reggie's email with the updated actually came out Wednesday evening, and the link that I will send again right now to the Google Doc version does have the correct numbering, and really big apologies for not having that included in the first round.
That sounds good. Thank you. No worries. There's probably, if you don't have that easily in front of you, there's probably not a great way. There's probably not a great way for you to follow along, but we can send out some of our notes later on for people who aren't able to follow up at the moment. The next bill was 608 for the Down East Correctional Facility. We thought that bill was important for consideration, not only for the union members, but also as a highly successful reentry program. I think, again, all of these bills about criminal justice are really difficult to take individually, knowing that there are a lot of desires to fundamentally change the criminal justice system to work better for racial communities in the state. But we'll just leave that there as something that we thought was important for your consideration. The next bill is a kinship care navigator program, which creates a position to help relatives or loved ones who are taking care of children because their parents are in crisis, incarcerated, or unable to take care of their kids. It's a relatively easy bill to implement. It's really just funding a single staff position at DHHS. Next up is LD 836, an act to expand Maine school-based health centers. We thought that this was very important for providing additional ongoing funding to school-based health centers and to add additional sites through an RFP process. It would use $600,000 from the Fund for Healthy Maine, which when you think about the cost of healthcare is a relatively low cost compared to the impact that schools having increased access to healthcare would provide. LD 900 provides the right to strike and withhold labor for folks in the public sector. This would provide union members with the ability to improve negotiations for wages and benefits and other things. And it has essentially no real cost to implement because it just extends an existing right to additional people. LD 1012 provides stable funding and support for childcare providers. This is subsidizing childcare available for those who may not be able to afford it otherwise. It includes standards to ensure that quality childcare is available, and it's crucial for development and impacts down the road. The fiscal note on there is about $500,000, and it includes some quality differential rates at different pieces in the 4-step childcare quality ranking system. LD 1043 is a similar, it's another early childhood bill. This makes pre-K available in each school district. It shows that those with wealth we know that those with wealth are better able to invest in early childhood education. So given generational wealth disparities for people of color in the state, it's important that kids have quality learning across the board. The gap starts in pre-K, the gap only widens. I think this is something that's been discussed for a while. A good part of the bill was funded in last year's budget. There's still more that has to get funded. But again, the ease of implementing for this one, we thought that this was really important to consider relative to the very high impact. 1135 increases funding for assertive community treatment. Essentially, this is primarily an appropriations bill that increases the rate for some treatment to be slightly above the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services rate. And so this means that the amount that's above that, the state would have to pay. 1295 increases the number of forensic emergency and crisis beds. It would allow to determine the need and humane treatment of arrested individuals with mental illness who are awaiting trial. As we know, our state prisons are sometimes housing people with mental illness without proper access to mental health treatment, care, and accommodations, which can lead to more discipline issues and longer incarceration without proper evaluation. So that one, I wasn't sure the exact fiscal note there, but the impact seemed very clear to us. LD 1404 clarifies, it essentially requires, it's a resolve, so it requires HHS to DHHS to submit a report and to show how it is providing home and community-based services to individuals experiencing homeless using a state plan that already exists. The fiscal note for that was $500,000. LD 1426 is an act to increase protection for land installment contracts. These have been traditionally used to exploit communities of color, especially folks who don't have access to traditional mortgages. They're an extension of the practice of redlining, which for decades prevented people of color from accessing affordable home mortgages. And they've cropped up as a new way to extract assets from people with low income. And again, disproportionately, those would be people of color. By regulating land installment contracts, people of color are less likely to be exploited by these products and inequities in income and access. There's no fiscal note attached to this legislation. Again, it wouldn't really have a high amount of costs relative to the impact. LD 1539 is an act to provide Maine children with access to affordable health care. This makes changes to the CovCare program. It extends the maximum eligibility from 200% to 325% of the federal poverty level, removes a waiting period. It establishes that eligibility is not subject to an asset test, and it provides coverage to persons 19 and 20 years of age, as well as to non-citizens under 21. It also directs DHHS to submit requests for waivers to the U.S. Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. And so the fiscal note for that is somewhat unpredictable, knowing that the waivers are possible. But it has a fiscal note of between $1.5 and $6 million, depending on what happens with those. But overall, a pretty significant expansion of healthcare access to people who fall just above some of the income guidelines that exist right now and often have no other source of affordable healthcare as a result. Removing a waiting period and extending the age. So we thought that that was a really important bill that would benefit low-income communities, again, which are disproportionately communities of color in Maine. LD 1709 is an act to implement the Maine Indian Claims Settlement. I know, again, that there are a couple of other bills here, and so we weren't really sure how to rank this in terms of priority or how to reconcile between multiple bills that we assumed weren't all going to pass at the same time. This one requires, among a couple other things, that the governor would inform the Maine Indian Tribal State Commission about any upcoming federal changes in legislation that would affect them, and including, where that's all going. It also amends the Maine Indian Claims Settlement to specifically state that the Passamaquoddy tribe and Penobscot Nation have the same rights, privileges, powers, and immunities as sovereign. It repeals a bunch of things that would reduce sovereignty and increases the same level of immunity for officers and employees of the tribes as officers and employees of the state. So I think we'll leave it there. Overall, anything that increases and honors tribal sovereignty was a big priority for us, as something that Maine needs to make progress on now, and that it can do so relatively easily. But we weren't sure how to reconcile the differences between different bills that attempt to do that. LT 1909 is an act to support emergency shelter access for people experiencing homelessness. This is a $3 million general fund appropriations bill that would go into the shelter operating subsidy program. And so it's a pretty straightforward and simple bill. It has a relatively low cost when you think about the alternatives. And I think, how are we doing for time? I haven't been looking.
5.5 minutes left.
Okay, so I will go through the next ones remaining very quickly. Some of them I think are the title gives you all you need to know. 1938 is something that would make donor breast milk available to Maine Care patients who have been identified as needing it. It's important for developing children and very expensive to purchase otherwise. So it disproportionately would affect low-income folks. 1962 requires propane and natural gas detectors in appropriate buildings. There really isn't more information on that, but it's a safety issue that we thought would benefit tenants. 2043, it reduces several crimes from Class E to civil violations. So we thought that that met an important priority of decriminalization. 2106 would clarify some rules within the authorization for prescription drugs. And so it would just make access to prescription drugs easier. 2115 is an act to implement the recommendations of the State Compensation Commission. This act, among other things, such as raising the governor's salary, would increase the salary of Maine legislators from 14,000 and 10,000 in each other year to 16,000 per year, and have adjustments for inflation, along with increasing the mileage allowance and lodging rate. So we thought that this was really important for increasing access to political representation, because more folks would be able to take many of the positions, or to be elected to many of the positions that those folks in the room right now have, even if they don't have access to, well, it doesn't do a perfect job of that, but it's an important immediate step that could make political representation easier next year. And finally, the last item is 2151, an act to implement the recommendations of the Maine Juvenile Justice System Assessment and Reinvestment Task Force. This gives $1 million to DHHS for funding for continuum of care, and $2.5 million to DOC for programming that includes behavioral health care in communities. So there were some conflicted opinions on where this one stands, but knowing that we thought it was especially important that the bill requires the Department of Corrections to take action to reduce the facility's average daily population by 25%, and then by next July, and by another 25% the following 2 years. And so there's probably a lot of other questions, and I see somebody that says that it died. So I'm gonna stop there because I saw a couple other questions, and would pause for those and any other comments that committee members would want to share. And I'm just gonna look up 1760. Yeah, sorry, I skipped that one. I must have scrolled past it. That was a really important bill for us. I'm not sure where it went on my screen, but this 1760 supports children's healthy development and school readiness, and it increases high quality early childhood education. So for similar reasons as other bills, we thought that that was really important to expand access to. We also like that LD 1760 has an advocacy component built in, where parents are trained and get experience and skills in decision-making and advocacy. It has a relatively low fiscal note of $845,000, which ultimately requires DHHS to seek federal funding. So sorry about that, and thanks, Joby, for pointing that out. So any of the other members of the committee, are there any other thoughts that you'd want to share? I'd also welcome any thoughts that folks have about your priorities here. We had about 20 bills that we had whittled down from 70. And so I know as I've been going through the score sheet, it's tough to identify what are the sweet spot of high impact and ease of implementation, and would welcome anybody's comments about that to help other folks as they're going through the score sheet.
Hey, thanks, Ian. I'm just going to chime in quickly that we had a number of bills that dealt with child development and supporting families, whether it was the bill to help put someone in DHHS to help navigate kinship care, or the different pre-K or daycare bills. I thought those were important focuses to help developing kids and families.
Anyone else? Great. Well, thank you so very much, Ian, Garrett. Thank you, all of Subcommittee 6. Thank you very, very much. And I think we'll move on to Subcommittee 7 and ask Ambassador Dana and Dee Clark if they will help introduce their committee members, allow them to introduce themselves, and then we'll go through your list. And we'll have a few minutes left over for just some open discussion about all of these bills and the process. So Dee and Ambassador Data.
You're on mute, Dee.
Good afternoon. We're pretty much went through our bills and prioritized them and then got together and discussed the ones that we prioritized. So we're prepared to present the bills that we found of high priority, most likely to have an impact on racial disparities. And we'll each read the bills that we were assigned. So that first bill would be LD 48.
Good afternoon. This is Tom Harnett. I represent Gardner and Farmingdale. And Representative Dunphy, who reviewed this bill, was unable to be here today. So I'm going to be discussing her bills as well as the ones I reviewed. The first one is LD 48, an act to authorize a general fund bond issue to invest in housing for persons who are homeless. This $15 million bond proposal would provide capital expenditures for housing for people who are homeless, who are disproportionately represented by Black, Indigenous, and people of color. This is a high impact bill, but it also has a large bond number. The second bill was one that I reviewed, and it's LD 182, which is an act to amend the Maine Bail Code regarding financial capacity of the defendant to post bond. This has been substantially amended. It really has nothing to do with bail anymore. The more important action in front of the Judiciary Committee on Bail was Representative Talbot Ross's bill, LD 1421, which I know has been discussed earlier. This LD 182 is still important. The Judiciary Committee received a rather troubling report from the Sixth Amendment Center about the way that Maine provides defense to indigent criminal defendants. To sum it up briefly, we don't do a very good job, and we may be running afoul of our constitutional responsibilities. One of the things they suggested was to have the financial screening of people in terms of their ability to pay for attorneys, pay filing fees, and pay penalties transferred from the Maine Commission on Indigent Legal Services to the judicial branch. They thought there was a conflict of interest having attorneys perhaps deciding whether or not defendants could pay their fees at a higher rate than they might be reimbursed for otherwise through the fund. So this bill moves all of those positions to the Judicial Department, but it also increases the number and the salaries of those positions. So it comes with a $361,000 fiscal note. It was approved by the committee because we thought we needed to pay attention to the Sixth Amendment Center, and we will see what happens with it on the appropriations table, but it is an important step to ensuring justice in Maine. And that's it for me right now.
So next up, we'll have Bill 402, which I think is Representative Fecto, if he's here.
I am. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for your time. I had 3 bills assigned to me in our subcommittee, and I'll run through all of them. The first one being LD 402, an act to restore overtime protections for Maine workers. This bill would amend Maine's law concerning how much an employee must earn in order to be deemed salaried. Current law calculates the salary threshold by multiplying the state's minimum wage by 3,000. So currently the salary threshold is $36,000 of annual pay. As mentioned, well, for communities of color, they earn on average an annual income that is much lower than white Mainers. In addition, the poverty rate amongst BIPOC is 3 times higher than white people. Therefore, LD 402 could significantly boost the pay for those who are working far more hours than would be deemed fair by the current salary threshold. So, in other words, there are people who are working at the current salary threshold, and the hours that they're putting into the work would far exceed the salary that they end up taking home. So by increasing the salary threshold, it would make it more equitable in terms of hours that an employee is dedicating to their job and the pay that they're taking home. I also had LD 1929. This is a resolve establishing the commission to study fair, equitable, and competitive tax policy for Maine's working families and small businesses. This bill does just what the title suggests. I would say one of the glaring oversights, this is actually my bill, would be that there is not an appointee to the commission representing an organization promoting civil rights that has racial justice or racial equity as its primary mission. I would suggest that should this bill move forward, that an amendment be presented that would make such a change so that the representation on the committee would be more inclusive on the commission rather. It is important to consider how current tax policy impacts Black, Indigenous, and people of color in the state of Maine, especially since we know the median annual income of BIPOC in Maine is $10,000 lower than white Mainers. Finally, I had assigned to me LD 1606. This is an act to increase funding for career and technical education programs. This bill would increase state funding for career and technical education CTE by $1.5 million. So the fiscal note for the bill is $1.5 million. It also removes the hold harmless provision. This bill, I think I heard a bill mentioned in subcommittee 4 that was related to CTE schools as well. For all those same reasons, increasing opportunities for young people to pursue careers in untraditional pathways. So, talking about electrical and plumbing, nursing. A lot of our CTE schools in the state offer nursing programs, firefighting, so on and so forth. These are opportunities to get young people into career paths that are not traditional, but also are high earning. This bill did not include anything specifically related to racial equity, but it might be helpful if in the future some funding for CTE schools went to promoting and marketing specifically towards people of color. I don't know if they traditionally think of themselves being in positions like this, and so I think it's important that that marketing be undertaken to show young people that they can also pursue careers in these fields as well that are traditionally underrepresented by people of color. So those are the bills assigned to me. I should mention that LD 402, I'm not sure if it had a fiscal note. I presume there would probably be some state costs because there are likely currently salaried employees in the state that their salaries would go up. So there's probably costs to the state. So there might be a fiscal note in that sense. And then LD 1929, the other bill I had assigned to me, I think has a very minimal cost because it's a study. It would just be the cost for establishing a commission. I think, and it looks like James has some additional information about LD 402 in terms of its fiscal note. And I think he's probably more knowledgeable than I am as to whether or not it has a cost, but that's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you, Representative. The next bill in order would be 428. That would be Senator Claxton's bill. You are on mute.
No, now I know.
There you go.
I'm sorry about that. Hi, Ned Claxton. Good afternoon to all of you folks. I can do Ann Perry's if that would be helpful too. But let's start with 428. which was a bill that would increase adult protective service workers' salaries by $5 an hour. And if you had a master's, you could earn an extra $1. That's important to bring the adult protective folks in line with the children's protective social service folks. The fiscal note for that one is $800,000, and it's currently sitting on the special appropriations table, having gotten through committee and both chambers. The next one on my list was 2137, I believe, which was passed on the 15th of this month. And when the dust settled, there was a charge to the department to increase comp for home-based care for nursing services. This was important given the percentage of folks from the BIPOC community who provide direct care. And so that was the interest of fairness. There were some specifics about the bill that didn't make sense since HHS had already increased some salaries. So it was headed to the appropriations table as a vote of support, not necessarily thinking the bill itself was ready for prime time, but it was clear that we wanted to do something to say, we hear what the disparities are, we need to do something about that. The fiscal note for that originally was $21 million a year. The other bill I looked at was 1954. This one was unanimous out of committee, and it limited how much the state could, the expression is, claw back from an individual who had gone into long-term care or nursing home. So now you can recover from their estate after they pass only those expenses directly related to Medicaid provision of care. So not anything else related to nursing home time or anything else that narrows how much people are vulnerable for in terms of reclaiming. Did you want me to try and do Ann Perry's?
That would be great, sure.
Okay. LD 706 has been passed through both houses and is now on the appropriation table. It makes medical nutrition therapy reimbursable by Maine Care. And we thought that was important to help some of the risk factors that plague so many Mainers and disproportionately Black Mainers. So that's already waiting for authorization on an appropriations table. And I don't, she didn't include a note about what the bill is or what the price tag is. LD 1171 was a bill to provide additional support for sexual assault and domestic violence prevention and victim services. It's passed through both chambers and is now on the appropriations table too. I don't have a price tag on that one. And then 1940 was a resolve directing the Department of Health and Human Services to increase Maine Care reimbursement for targeted case management to reflect inflation. The people trying to do a good job at targeted case management have had their workload increased and no real changes in their salaries for years. So this is a reflection of how crucial that role is in hooking people up with community services. So those are the three that I know most about, six that I know most about.
Do you want me to jump in now, Ambassador Dana? Okay, great, thank you. Hi, I'm State Representative Vicky Dudare, represent District 94. So scrolling back up to LD 502, an act to establish the Summer Success Program Fund. This will be a dedicated fund directed and administered by the Commissioner of Education. The money will come some from the general fund and some from grants and gifts. The goal of this bill is to close the achievement gap between high-performing and low-performing students in elementary and secondary schools in the state. So obviously very important to our work today to help bridge that gap. Then I have LD 1244, an act to authorize the Gambling Control Board to accept an application from the Passamaquoddy tribe to operate 50 slot machines in the tribe's high-stakes Beano facility. You can read more in detail, but as I did speak to the bill's sponsor, Representative Collings, this would be in Washington County, one of the poorest, Washington County, one of the poorest counties in our state. And I think it's important to help and try and get more revenue in that area. So we support this one as well. And finally, the last one that I had was LD 2144, an act to protect Maine residents from stalking and unauthorized surveillance by use of an unmanned aerial vehicle. So this adds drones to the list of the laws governing stalking in the criminal code. You know, it's important because people of color are proportionately stalked and surveyed more than other people are. And seems to me that racial profiling, immigration harassment, things like that can be done very easily with a drone. So I think we ought to get behind this bill as well. Thank you.
All right, I can jump in with my bills and go quickly to save time for everyone. So I'm Molly Dana, Tribal Ambassador for the Penobscot Nation. I had LD 573, an act to extend time limits for placing land in trust status under the Maine Indian Land Claims Settlement Act. I had LD 2094, which is an act to implement the recommendations of the task force on changes to the Land Claims Settlement Act. And then I had LD 1490, an act to enhance tribal state collaboration in the enforcement of child support. So the trust land bill 573, that will be covered in LD 2094. It's still important because we don't know what version of 2094 we will end up passing. So it's important to have these other bills as support, at least in the process somewhere, or if we need to revisit them in the future. 2094 is omnibus legislation that is a product of the task force that sought to amend the Land Claim Settlement Act that has really been the root of a lot of tension between the tribes and the state. It is a set of 22 recommendations that cover all areas in the Settlement Act that have caused the most jurisdictional confusion and created channels that undermine tribal sovereignty. So by supporting everything in 2094, it's really a boost to tribal sovereignty, enhance self-government of tribes and self-determination that helps all of our Wabanaki nations in every sense of the word helpful, really, and the whole state. LD 1490, we are still strategizing from our standpoint how to best focus our energy and go about things, but I do think it is a very important bill. It's an act to enhance tribal state collaboration, enforcement, child support. It's basically giving the tribes the same tools as the state to collect child support, and it really helps struggling families, and it also strengthens our tribal courts. Thank you.
So is, this is Rachel, SD and Ambassador Dana, is that all of the bills?
No, there's a few more.
Okay.
I think the next one is body cameras in law enforcement.
We have a few members that aren't present today. So what I'll do, I'll follow up with everybody and send the descriptions of those bills, but maybe we could focus on the people we do have. So I think we have Dee, you have your bills to present. Maybe we can do that now, and then Rep Harnett can finish up with his, and then I think we'll be good.
Okay, so I'm Dee Clark, Executive Director of Survivors Speak USA. And the two bills I had are LD 2085 and LD 1080. 2085 is to ensure access to sexual and reproductive health care and education for all Maine jails, state correctionals, and detention facilities. This is not race neutral, but we already know that in juvenile detention, in prison and jails, the higher rate of female inmates are disproportionately Black, Brown, Indigenous. So with that said, and we also know, and I did a little research, so the Journal of Women's Health states that African-American women are disproportionately affected by multiple sexual and reproductive health conditions compared to women with other races. So this bill does appear race neutral, but it's really important, and I think we should support it. It's a small step towards health equity. It has an advisory, a healthcare advisory committee, and a person that would be on that would be someone that's primary mission is to advance racial justice. Yeah, I feel like it's a really good bill. I didn't know what the fiscal note would be. I couldn't find that. I could do some more research. Somebody already here might know that. Yeah. So anyway, to me, it's a step towards some racial justice. The other bill is to aid an act to require education about African-American history and the history of genocide. I found this really interesting while doing the research. This bill is race explicit. It directly addresses racial disparities. This bill is a step towards achieving some racial and cultural equity. The amendment requires that African-American history and culture be taught in schools, aligned with the parameters for essential instruction and graduation requirements, and includes in the new review of content standards and performances. This amendment directs the Department of Education to convene 2 volunteer advisory groups to collect information and prepare and make available material for teaching African-American history and culture and the history of genocide in accordance with this legislation. This amendment also provides that the addition of African-American history and the history of genocide to the school curriculum takes effect July 1st, 2020, so as to be in effect for the 2020-21 school year. That's it for me. Hearing no questions, we'll move right on.
Madam Chair, I've got 2 bills of mine and 2 bills of Representative Dunphy's left. Do you want me to try to run through those very quickly or circulate the summaries to the entire body?
I believe because of timing, Representative Harnett, we are at 1 o'clock or close to 1 o'clock. It may be best to go ahead and circulate that.
Okay.
Yep. I thank you for bringing that up. And I see there was another question around a bill, 1080. If everyone can give us a few more minutes.
This is Joby. I just raised that because Dee just talked about it, but it's not on my priority setting tool list.
I think the right number is 1050.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So with that, subcommittee 7, does that conclude your report?
Thank you.
Yeah. This is a lot of work. It's now 1 o'clock, and it really didn't give us any room for discussion. I think it's extremely important that, having gone through so many bills, and I know it feels at times we're just rattling off numbers and titles, but this is an incredible amount of work that's happening on behalf of the people of the state of Maine, in trying to get to a place in which we start doing our lawmaking and thinking about policies and thinking about the best way to improve our state and our quality of life for people, with an eye towards racial equity and justice. So it's an extraordinarily important process. I know it has felt tedious many times and rushed, but you've all done a great deal of work that I hope that you feel proud to be associated with and to have done. Just very quickly before we do conclude today's meeting, that is, we will put all of this material together. It is dependent on you filling out those forms so that we do have a body of evidence of our deliberations and our considerations. On Wednesday, the Permanent Commission will start to look at the qualitative results of this, and that will get out to each and every one of you. We will continue our work. On Friday begins the Permanent Commission's discussions on priorities based on all of your input. And then by next, Friday's the 31st. So on August 3rd, the Permanent Commission will meet again and have finalized the list so that by August 5th, we are able to get a report out to each of you and to the public and back to the legislature. There's one critical step in between there, which is we do take the list that we believe will move forward and share that with constituents, share that with particularly organizations that are being led by the racial, indigenous, and tribal populations to get additional feedback from the public, if you will, and then narrow down our list. So I want to just ask, I know it's a little past time, we want to end, but if anyone has, particularly legislators who really just gave a lot to the process, and we couldn't be more proud of that. You're serving in the state legislature at this level for all of the people of Maine. Couldn't be more proud to be with you. If there were any comments about the process that you want to share as we close out, and also it can be done by email to the full committee. Any questions moving forward, reflections, anything at all? I know we're asking a lot right now.
I'd just like to say, Madam Chair, that, and I'm sure many of us feel this way, that I was very happy to be asked. So thank you very much for including us.
Absolutely.
I agree. But Rachel, I would very much like the Permanent Commission to discuss methods that they think would be best for making this process perhaps a permanent part of what the legislature does. So I would really like to have some suggestions for us moving forward about, what would be the best way to make this part of what we do. Thanks.
Absolutely, absolutely. Senator Claxton?
Thank you. A number of us have on HHS been talking about how to make the questions that are asked specific of each of these bills part of the normal workflow in the work of the committee. And I would love to see that happen in the next session, that we ask questions about equity and disparity with each bill and understand their impact. So that's an intention of mine that I hope that I can bring to the next session.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you for that suggestion. I think we've heard that a lot from various legislators, is that they really would like some. Thank you, Representative Tepler, as well, for mentioning some method that could be used on a regular basis so that we're not doing things after the fact or tokenizing certain populations in our state. So thank you both for that. Representative Harnett, did you also have something to contribute?
Very quickly, and I know you're going to get the summaries and I don't want to belabor the point, but please pay particular attention to LD 1684, which is an act to clarify the right to counsel for juveniles and improve due process for juveniles. This could have a huge impact on the communities we're trying to serve here today. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And by the way, legislators, if you want to communicate with, again, through your subcommittee chairs or any member of the Permanent Commission the next days ahead into next week about any particular bill, all of that information is welcome and appreciated, particularly if there are amendments that you know of, or if the bill is at a different stage and should no longer be considered. Whatever that information is, please feel free to contact any one of us and the staff. And I'll now ask the staff if there are any issues or concerns or questions or instructions that we should have before we adjourn. I'm not hearing any, and I just, again, I hope that you know how much we value your input. And, you know, as we move forward, the final answer is always in the legislature. So this is just an advice to bring forward. And for me, you know, serving in the 128th, what this means is if and when we go back, that there's now a whole cadre of legislators, you know, from all parties, bipartisan, House and Senate, that now bring this work forward. So it just feels like our journey together continues. And we thank you for all of your commitment. Representative Hickman, can you close us out?
Putting me on the spot. I just want to thank the staff for its incredible work shepherding this process. And of course, to all of my colleagues who have stepped up to the plate during these very crucial times. They are transformative. We will begin anew and move this work forward. And so Representative Talbot Ross, Madam Chair, I absolutely and totally appreciate your leadership and your long struggle to bring these issues to the public's understanding and participation. And I know with you in the lead, we can get this work done. So thank you for your work and your patience and your fortitude in the face of so many challenges.
Oh gosh, I very much appreciate that. The journey continues with all of us there. It's a great team effort, great team. Thank you, Representative Hickman. Thank you, everybody. And we'll see you and talk with you soon. Have a great rest of your week. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.